1 hour and 45 minutes was all it took for Eric Tadeo Ramirez to become famous. His name has appeared on just too many YouTube videos and news reports. And for what? Some people consider him to be the most intelligent person in the world, and maybe even very fearless, while some others, they believe he simply set himself up for what happened to him. So what happened to the Texas man who bragged about stealing $50,000 from a Mexican cartel? Let's find out. Disrespect to disappear.
The FBI is on the case of a missing Texas man they say bragged about stealing thousands of dollars from a Mexican cartel and then disappeared just 2 hours later.
There are over 1 million dumb ways to die, and on top of that long, deadly list is probably disrespecting a cartel. No one who has ever done it has lived to tell the tale, and there's a great possibility that Eric Tadeo Ramirez will not survive this ordeal either. Tadeo didn't just disrespect a cartel, he stole from them. He stole $50,000 from a fearsome Mexican drug cartel, an equivalent of approximately 1 million pesos. He also called a woman whom he knew was deeply affiliated with the cartel he stole from, and he boasted of having defrauded the cartel. He believed he was safe in the U.S., protected from any retaliation that the cartel wanted to orchestrate against him, so he bragged about his success. He flaunted his patriotism and carelessly rambled about what he did. But he didn't just brag. He insinuated that the cartel was incapable, vulnerable, penetrable, and weak. But he was wrong, dead wrong. No one disrespects a cartel and gets away with it, not even if you are all the way in the United States, much less 15 minutes away. Ramirez made the call from a birthday party at exactly 11 a.m. on the 24th of March, 2023, and he was kidnapped at 12:45 a.m. in a blue Dodge Ram pickup truck. His bloodied face became the final haunting image of him, frozen in time, before he was swept away to Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, the very place he had stolen from, the city that also belongs to the cartel he stole from. Tadeo has been missing ever since, and no one knows exactly what happened to him. All we can do is hope that he doesn't end up like this 16-year-old who ended up on the cartel's radar. Back in 2021, a 16-year-old boy in the port city of Acapulco refused to work for the cartel. The boy, whose name was withheld so he would not be killed by the cartel, was born into a family that lived paycheck to paycheck, but he still never wanted to be a sicario, mule, or a narco junior. He refused to be a runner for the cartel. Unfortunately, the cartel tagged this behavior as a serious lack of respect. He did not brag about stealing from the cartel as Tadeo did, but the cartel still categorized his decision as disrespectful. You have to understand that the only way the cartel can maintain its street cred is if they are feared by everyone, and being refused by a teenager is a sign that their methods of intimidation were not as effective as they had hoped. So, in October 2021, the cartel proceeded to protect its reputation. The 16-year-old was reportedly returning from his cousin's birthday party when the taxi he was traveling in was run down by an unknown vehicle. From the moment the taxi stopped, you could hear the little boy's heart racing. Gunmen jumped out from the vehicle, pulled him out of the rundown taxi, and forced him to enter their car. Just like Tadeo, the 16-year-old had been abducted by cartel members. Investigations later revealed that the teenager was kidnapped by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, aka the CJN Cartel. In less than 15 years, the CJN has become the most dangerous criminal organization in all of Mexico. And the only reason why they aren't known as the most powerful cartel is because of El Chapo's Sinaloa cartel. This cartel simply does not mess around. So when it was announced that the 16-year-old was allegedly kidnapped by the CJNGE, everyone knew there would be dire consequences. The 16-year-old Mexican was taken to an unknown location, robbed of all his confidence, and beaten gruesomely with a huge wooden board. He was subjected to the kind of atrocious torture that only the Mexican drug gang is capable of. Following the torture, they forced him to place his hands on the same board with which he had been beaten, and then they mutilated him twice. Using a machete, they hacked off the boy's 2 index fingers, and if you were hoping that the boy's fingers could be reconnected, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. The cartel made sure that no one could ever find the teenager's fingers. The boy's father stated that it cost 10,000 pesos to treat his injuries, and cutting off his index fingers isn't a random decision. The CJNG chose his index fingers for a specific reason, because there is very little a person can do without their index fingers. There are only a handful of industries a person can work in without their index fingers. However, the individual can still sell drugs as this doesn't require all 5 fingers. The teenager and his family also had to move to the border town of Tijuana, as the boy was also receiving death threats. Now this is what was done to a teenager that didn't even steal. Eric Tadeo Ramirez stole 50 grand and even bragged about it. This is why everyone was quick to assume the worst about his situation. The 16-year-old boy didn't even do anything wrong, and the cartel treated him like he raised his middle finger at them. So what if I tell you that there is someone who actually gave the cartel the middle finger? His name, Juan Luis Laguna Rosales, aka El Pirata del Culiacan, the Pirate of Culiacan. The story of El Pirata Culiacan is sad and pitiful. He was a 17-year-old YouTuber sensation and internet star. El Pirata dropped out of high school when he was 15, and from here on, he proceeded to live his life on the fast lane. After some time, he started getting more and more invitations to parties. Unfortunately, these invitations were also one-way tickets he could never pull himself out of. El Pirata now had a drinking problem, and this is what he became famous for. He would post videos of himself chugging down beers and bottles of whiskey, and sometimes he would get so drunk that he would pass out. El Pirata lived his life in a bottle. The drinking age in Mexico is 18, but this 17-year-old drank like he had no limits. El Pirata was a party animal. He posted pictures on Instagram with large guns, half-naked women, and luxury cars. This got him likes, views, and followers. He had more than 300,000 followers on Instagram and over 1 million followers on Facebook. Sometimes this fame can be even more intoxicating than the alcohol he was addicted to, and one of the nights that the alcohol had clouded his judgment, El Pirata disrespected a cartel. He didn't just disrespect a cartel, he went head-on for the boss. This was the day El Pirata took on El Mencho, and if you don't know who El Mencho is, then you better brace yourself.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho. He's blamed for a flood of narcotics into the U.S.
El Mencho is the guy that even members of other cartels tell you to fear. He's one of the most wanted men on the planet. I mean, Uncle Sam has placed a $10 million bounty on his head, while the Mexican government is ready to pay 30 million pesos for the same drug lord. El Pirata posted a video of himself dissing the drug lord.
Papa, yo te me pongo a traer lo que sea la verga. Así que el Mecho a mí me pela la verga.
And that's not the only time he insulted the cartel leader. He also posted another video where he gave El Mencho the middle finger and asked him to suck his D. To El Pirata, it was all a big game, a never-ending, alcohol-raining, internet-trending party. But in Mexico, where the rates of cartel-related violence have blasted through the roof and the streets have been painted blood red, no one is truly invincible, at least not when you go after the demons of the streets. So maybe El Pirata wanted clout, maybe he wasn't thinking right, maybe he just wanted more followers for his YouTube channel. The teenage YouTuber thought he could get away with disrespecting one of the world's most wanted criminals, who has been dubbed deadlier than a rattlesnake. El Pirata also matched his level of overconfidence with a dangerous level of negligence. He posted his location online and asked his fans to meet up with him. His first mistake was that he trespassed. Then he went further to write his exact location on the internet. That's very similar to what our Texas citizen Eric Ramirez did after stealing $50K from a different cartel. El Pirata tagged his location on Instagram, and unfortunately, El Mencho's men came calling. At around 11 p.m. on the 18th of December, 2021, El Pirata was killed. The teenager was shot not once, not twice, but 15 times. And when a man is shot that many times, you know it's done to ensure he doesn't survive. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. El Pirata was mortally wounded and died later at the hospital. All evidence shows that the hit was carried out by El Mencho's men, or the men known as Los Matazetas. But for Eric Tado Ramirez, he was kidnapped by one of the major rivals of El Mencho's cartel. Messy mistakes. In every successful heist, there is always a backstory, and sometimes even months planning their operation. They would plan the strategy, the response to fightbacks, if any, and most of all, they would research their target. And digging into your target is what determines whether or not you succeed or you're hauled into a blue pickup truck with a bloodied face. Even the Chinese general of war, Sun Tzu, knew of this secret. That's why he said, if you know yourself but not the enemy, you're in for a defeat. Ramirez didn't do his homework. He didn't know who he was up against, because if he knew, he probably wouldn't have stolen money from them, much less brag about it. And while he might be able to get away with a few mistakes, in some organizations he cannot beg for the same leniency when dealing with the cartel he stole from, because with this cartel, it is always a game of life and death, to be ruled or to rule, to be killed or to kill, and mercy is only for the weak. Ramirez was kidnapped by the Cartel del Noreste, also known as the CDN, and if that name does not give you the chills, you should know they are one of the many offspring of the most notorious cartel in narco history, Los Zetas. The leaders of Los Zetas were trained by the U.S. and Israeli Special Forces, and this is why no one had an answer to Los Zetas' antics for some time. Los Zetas do not hesitate to kidnap, torture, kill, or even burn people alive just to make a point. These people are vicious, and they refuse to implement the typical diplomatic methods of cartels before them. If anyone stands in their way, they'd hack the person into a million pieces. If they are threatened, they'll kidnap the person who dared to, behead the victim, and display the head in public. If they feel bothered by a person person or an organization, they'd burn the entire building or person to the ground. And even if the person did absolutely nothing wrong but simply looked like the wrong person, wore the wrong outfit, or stood in the wrong place at the wrong time, they will not hesitate to strike hard. Basically, the Los Zetas are not the kind of cartel members you can reason with. They do not form alliances, and they certainly do not beg for respect. They take what they want when they want it, and in the most heinous ways possible. Cartel del Noreste, which is Spanish for the Northeast Cartel, inherited this ruthlessness, upgrading it to the highest possible level. They have become invincible, untouchable, and almost as deadly as their mentor. The Northeast Cartel is now the third most powerful cartel in Mexico. The major criminal activities of the Northeast Cartel are kidnapping, extortion, human trafficking, terrorism, money laundering, and carjacking. And the CDN does not operate in just Mexico. They also have an operational presence in Honduras, Guatemala, Colombia, and even in the United States. However, when the CDN wants to carry out an operation against any of its enemies, the cartel doesn't even have to get its hands dirty. Instead, the cartel has an armed wing, much like how the government has military personnel. This armed wing of the CDN is known as Tropa del Infierno, which translates in English as the Troops of Hell. The leader of the Tropa del Infierno is the man known as El Huerco. El Huerco was captured in Tamaulipas, and after his arrest, the Troops of Hell began a deadly shootout with the armed forces so as to force them to release their leader. El Huerco's brother, El Mayito, was determined to secure his release. Therefore, the Troops of Hell decided to use bloodshed as a tool to get what they needed. Although El Huerco wasn't released, this incident is proof of what the Troops of Hell are capable of. Where the cartel itself is known for drug trafficking, the Troops of Hell can turn the whole of Mexico City into a war zone, and they have done it many times before. One explicit instance is the ambush on the City Hall in Villa Union, Coahuila, Mexico. Coahuila is one of the neighborhood cities of Nuevo Laredo, where the cartel is based. But as you can imagine, Nuevo Laredo is not enough for such an influential cartel as the CDN. Neither is it enough of a territory for the brutal Tropa del Infierno, so they wanted to expand. Typical of every drug cartel, but there's one problem. The Northeast Cartel were not beggars. They didn't ask for alliances, nor did they make business deals, so asking for a few regions to control was not part of the question. They wanted the entire city, and they were not about to take no for an answer. The CDN ambushed the city, targeting the place that would get the most government attention. They attacked the city hall so as to get the state government to yield to their demands and announce their presence in the city, and they made their point very clearly. Even though 16 members of the Troops of Hell died as a result of the operation, unfortunately, they still achieved what they set out to do. They killed 2 civilians as well as 4 police officers, and whilst escaping the chaos they created, they took along an unknown number of innocents, many of whom are still missing to this day. Although the police have caught 3 suspects who were allegedly part of the attackers, their code of silence is unmatched, and no one knows if the missing captives would ever be found. But this isn't even the first time that the CDN will create this kind of havoc and chaos. Another show of ruthlessness from the Northeast Cartel and the Troops of Hell is when they released a gruesome video of how they deal with rival cartel gang members. And this is not the regular, organized execution you might be used to from the dark web. The CDN is so much like the Los Zetas that they are not just creative with their techniques, but are also fueled by their emotions. When dealing with their rivals, the CDN tend to make grisly decisions that will make you wonder just how far their psychotic tendencies can go. At the start of the video, you can see the 3 rival cartel members on their knees and in chains. There are also 7 to 8 heavily armed gunmen standing behind the offenders. They were dressed in armored uniforms and their faces were covered with black clothes. And because of the way they appeared, you could easily have them confused with the army. That's to tell you just how military-like and organized the CDN and the Troops of Hell are. After asking the captives a few questions, it was revealed that the 3 men were actually rivals of the CJANG, the same cartel that is now regarded as the most dangerous criminal organization in all of Mexico. Remember how ruthless the CJANG is? Ruled by El Mencho, the cartel is known for nothing but violence on all sides. With over 5,000 members scattered all over the world, the death count connected to the cartel is swimming in the hundreds. This just tells you that the Cartel de Noreste truly fears no one. And after the rival cartel members had confessed to where they were from, the execution began. The 3 offenders were brutally murdered in a slow, very disturbing and horrific manner. A sharp kitchen knife was first used to slit the neck of the first gang member, and a very blunt axe was used to chop the remaining 2 in pieces. And all of these were happening happening while the men were still breathing. Now this is the same cartel Eric Ramirez decided to steal money from, or worse, brag to. He had managed to steal the 50 grand and escape unscathed. However, for some reason that only Ramirez knows, he decided to call a member of the CDN cartel. But still, it wasn't even the call that flipped things upside down. Indeed, the cartel members would have been infuriated by his bragging. But still, that wasn't the main spin-off. The mind-blowing and ultimate crusher of the entire game was the fact that he shared his exact location with the same people he was trying to run away from. That was the icing on the cake. I can already imagine the look on the CDN's faces when they found Ramirez located just 15 minutes from the border between the two cities, Nuevo Laredo, where the cartel members occupied, and Laredo, Texas, where Ramirez was located. Now you and I might not know too much about stealing from a cartel, but one thing is sure, if you want to brag about a crime that you committed, you should do that miles away from the crime scene, not at a place where the cartel members are only a few minutes away. Ramirez was kidnapped by 3 gunmen from a night party. Many believe that the cartel members were able to find him by tracing his cell when he made the call or by his posts on social media. CCTV cameras on the streets even caught the moment Ramirez was struggling to escape. While the truck was still moving, the video, which is yet to be released to the public, captured Ramirez opening the door of the truck and attempting to escape. His face was bloody and you could see just how scared he was, but his glimpse of freedom soon faded, and the cartel members dragged him back into the moving vehicle and slammed the door shut. This makes you think about all the possible things they could be doing to him, especially since his face was already immensely covered in blood while he was being taken to HQ. One thing's for sure, whatever he would encounter would be ugly. The lost and the found. Months have passed and Ramirez is yet to be found. Though the FBI has captured one culprit, the investigation is right back to the beginning because the apprehended individual refused to spill the beans. That means the world is left with the same questions. Where is Ramirez? What are the cartel members doing to him? And will he ever be found? For some people, Ramirez's case brings back memories of the 4 friends who traveled to Mexico from Texas for a tummy tuck surgery and were to return on the 3rd of March.
We drove through a few streets and corners until we got back on the main street, and that's when a gang of shooting started. Zindel and Shaheed, they jumped out to run, and they were gunned down.
That is the voice of Eric Williams, one of the 4 Americans who were shockingly rammed by a truck on that fateful day. Though they came to Mexico for a medical procedure, things didn't go smoothly. A Mexican cartel had taken them for foreign drug traffickers, and this story is one of the worst cases of mistaken identity. The 4 friends were chased, cornered, shot at, and then forced to the back of a black pickup truck. This shootout even led to the death of an innocent woman, Arely Pablo Servando, who was killed by a stray bullet. And all of these happened right in the faces of the public, in broad daylight, while Latavia McGee, mother of I-6, and the reason the Americans were even on the road, thankfully suffered no physical injuries. Eric Williams was shot in both of his legs. The other 2, Shaheed Woodard and Zindel Brown, unfortunately, died from the bullet wounds. But what happened after they were kidnapped? What did the Mexican cartels do to the Americans? After they were kidnapped along the border town of Matamoros, Mexico, they were taken to a shack and were stuffed there for days. Even though Eric and Latavia had to suffer the mental torture of watching their friends die right in their faces, they were also faced with unspeakable terror from the cartel. They were intimidated, interrogated, and even forced to copulate with each other despite being friends. They had to lie that they were siblings to escape that unthinkable mental torture. It was only after the 2 friends were deemed innocent by the cartel that they allowed them to leave. But Shaheed and Zindel had already passed on. However, while Shaheed and Zindel died because they were mistaken for drug traffickers, Oscar Wall's life was ruined because he refused to pay the extortion fee. Oscar is a Miami barber who used to live in Mexico. During his exclusive interview, he mentioned how he suffered the deadly pressure of extortion from Mexican cartel members.
Oscar says he was leaving a nightclub in October of 2018 when he and his driver were attacked.
The car just got surrounded by 8 guys with their face covered in AKs. They took us and they were beating me inside the car, like they covered my face.
And when he refused to bend, they came for him. The person driving him that night was shot dead right on the spot, and Oscar was lucky to be alive. Or maybe not so lucky after all. He was heavily tortured and punished like he had stolen $50,000 from them, when in fact, it was they who were on the mission to collect from him and force him to sell drugs. He said he went through a series of brutal beatings, and the scars are still felt by him to this day. In his words, the Mexican cartel members were whipping, beating, hammering, and torturing him mercilessly. It was all thanks to a police officer and his intelligence that he was able to escape in the middle of the night. Oscar lived in a shelter in the U.S. for a whole year before he could ever truly be free again. But while Ramirez's story is a little similar to both these stories, the difference is that Ramirez wasn't mistaken for someone else, and he wasn't extorted. He stole from the cartel. It was an unforgivable crime, and the cartel was intent on making him pay, one way or another. He could have been tortured in the vehicle like Oscar, given that. The video footage showed his face covered in blood, and there are more reasons to believe that he was in fact tortured while on his way to others. Some of his clothing has been retrieved from the road where it must have either dropped or was thrown away. But they aren't just clothing items anymore. The shirt and pant trousers that were collected had unfortunately been soaked with blood. Not sure whose blood it is, but I think you can take a guess. The Northeast Cartel is known for all sorts of extreme violence, so beating until there's an extreme level of bleeding for them is not a difficult task. And though all hope might seem to be lost concerning Ramirez, judging from the tracks and the time he remains missing, it doesn't mean the police will stop looking, not when he has a family desperately waiting for his return. Eric's sister and girlfriend were the ones who called the police and reported he was missing. They were allegedly also at the party when Ramirez was kidnapped. Though they weren't the same people that heard the phone call, they noticed he was missing and dialed the emergency number hours later, but it was already too late. Ramirez was halfway into the borders of Mexico and further away from his safe American soil. Even when he tried to escape the vehicle while in motion, he was simply yanked back into the truck, and only one suspect has been found in the case. His name, Jonathan Cabriales. He was driving the same blue Dodge Ram pickup truck that was used in the kidnapping. The license plates were the same, and the location was even more befitting. According to the FBI, the truck was seen again at around 2 p.m., coming back from Mexico and into Texas through the same border Ramirez was taken through. So Cabriales might have dropped off Ramirez and then immediately came back to Texas. A job well done. Not quite. Because the FBI was already on his tail and his appearing in the same crime vehicle didn't help his matters. But how are we so sure that it was Cabriales that drove the truck to Mexico and that he isn't just a decoy the cartels placed to divert the attention of the investigators? Two events stand out. Cabriales could be a member of the cartel, or he could also be a victim himself. His mother and grandmother confirmed that he in fact traveled from Texas to Mexico on the 24th of March, 2023. Cabriales' mother lived in Laredo, Texas, so she could confirm that he left Texas, while his grandmother lives in Nuevo, Laredo, Tamaulipas, and she confirmed that he was indeed in Mexico as well. However, they both stated that they were worried when he went on this journey. Cabriales stated that there were 3 other men in the truck with him when Ramirez was kidnapped, but that is not the only reason that indicates he knew about the kidnapping. He himself testified that he was in on the crime as well. During questioning, Cabriales confessed that he was there the night Ramirez was forced into the vehicle and taken away to Mexico. He also told the FBI that he knew who Ramirez was, so it's very possible that Cabriales wasn't a mere driver for the cartel, and he wasn't blackmailed or forced by the cartel to drive the victim away. He was one of them, the ruthless, bloodthirsty drug cartel, a Northeast cartel member. And did he know of Ramirez's sin? Again, yes, he did. Cabriales said he knew that Ramirez stole $50,000 from the CDN, and he knew exactly what the mission was. He was there when Ramirez was taken, beaten, and yanked back into the vehicle, and he was not afraid to confess it all. But when it came down to the most important question, where is Ramirez now? Cabriales went mute, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't want to tell. He couldn't break their code of silence. It's either he is just too loyal to the Northeast Cartel, or he is scared that they might come for him and kill him. Either way, Cabriales is another dead end, and the FBI is still looking for Ramirez. No one is sure whether or not Ramirez will be found, and if he is found, no one knows what condition he'll be in.